consultant with the DESARA Group, and I've been spending a lot of time overseas in both Europe, Asia, and Latin America doing various works. And I found that once I engage the culture, it really helps me in achieving the goals that I particularly had. Let me just explain a little bit about what the DESARA Group is. We are a consultancy, and we have various competencies. Actually, there's more that's on this list here, but we do a lot of business process improvement. We offer cross-cultural training, help companies with supplier selection. We're heavy into Six Sigma training and implementation, also lean. We can also assist in offshore facility assessments, help you with planning, and do work relative to technology transfer. That's what I was doing in this Malaysian facility, moving technology around to and from this particular facility for another client. And we also help out in sourcing and partnering selection. Okay, here's information about me. I've been around a while. I started that's how long I've been around. And since 1995, I've been spending a lot of my time doing work offshore. I've done a lot of work in China, India, the Philippines, Malaysia, Singapore, Thailand, over in that part of the world. I've also worked in about 8 different Latin American countries and done a lot of work in Europe. And I've been helping out companies in various capacities here. Okay, what we're going to talk about today is globalization, and how that is changing the role of the professional right now that's involved in globalization. So many people's careers now are crossing, besides country borders, they're crossing continent borders. We'll talk about the importance of cultural understanding and how that's so vital for somebody's success. Then I will get into giving you some highlights of various world cultures. This is just a 1-hour event. I really cannot do this justice, but I can mention a few things relative to some various Asian cultures. I'll mention a situation that I was involved in 2008, where it cost this client a lot of money by making various cultural mistakes. I'll talk about the various North American culture, some various European cultures, and Latin American cultures. And then we'll end by talking a little bit about after one learns to understand and apply, and to understand one culture, applying it for success. Again, to do something like this for each individual culture, it's normally a one-day event, so I'm trying to cover half the world in 1 hour. So unfortunately, you're only going to get a little bit of a touch of everything. Okay, what's happening now is cross-border activity is increasing. There's constantly new players, new cultures that us professionals in the Western world need to deal with, and with that, there's new regulations, and all of that makes the entire business community, the world business community, more complicated. And with this complications, that also equals greater challenge. Those of you that were on my outsourcing webinar, understand some of the other challenges that professionals have. And one of the big ones is culture. And when I find that cultural sensitivity is critical to success, I've seen many instances of mistakes that have cost companies a lot of money, and I will mention one or two during this session. And as far as my situation, how I got involved in culture and how I realized that it was important to my success as a professional, I guess goes back to my childhood. I am second generation on my mother's side, Sicilian American, so I grew up in two cultures. At home, because my mother ran the home, it was a Sicilian American home. But out on the street, growing up in New York City with my friends, I was in another world outside of the house. And I didn't realize it, but I had my foot in both worlds. And then growing up, I had another situation. My wife is Latin American, so she was not born in this country, lived in about five other countries before coming to the United States as an adult. She lived in various places in Latin America and in Europe. And I was, over the years, hearing her saying that Americans do this, Americans do that, and I realized that the cultures in different parts of the world and the way people see and do things are different. And then I began to do a lot of offshore work back about 15 years ago. I started, and while I was an executive at Timex, one of my challenges was to improve the supply base in China and in other regions. We had some in Latin America, also some in Europe and in other Asian countries, but most of them were in China. And I did get some improvement relative to quality improvement, on-time delivery improvement, and also cost reductions. That basically was my challenge that the company laid down for me. And once I realized that the culture was important, and I engaged the culture, I began to get even more improvements. One improvement after the other. It was constant. And in fact, I helped out a group of these Chinese suppliers so much that at one of our supplier meetings, they awarded me a certificate and actually gave me a Chinese name, and they tell me that the Cantonese, the translation from Cantonese in English is good and knowledgeable. But I don't know, it might be something else. But that is something that has stayed with me, and I've realized that one of the major keys to success, once you go outside of one's country or one's culture, is understanding the culture. And I guess I had a little bit of a head start with other people because I've been exposed to two different cultures in most of my life. I've had a foot in more than one world. But cultural savvy, what I found is that aids in communication, because a lot of the culture and the language governs how people communicate, and people communicate and process information differently, even in one English-speaking country to another. A lot of people say India and the United States are separated by a common language. In other words, we do speak a common language, but the way that we process information, the way that the two cultures interpret is different. So it aids communications. It establishes rapport. Those of you that were on my outsourcing session, I made the point that rapport is extremely important, that one of the things one needs to do to be successful is to get a good relationship with people, and cultural savvy helps that. It enhances team motivation and buy-in. A lot of companies now, they're working in cross-cultural teams where they're from different cultures. In fact, next week I'm working at a client where they're going to have people brought in. I'm doing some work with them, and people are being brought in from about 8 different countries, and they're being separated into 5 different teams, and most of the teams have representatives from at least 3 or 4 different countries. It builds positive relationships. That always helps, and it's very important in dealing with a lot of countries that value relationships more than they value contracts. It helps cooperation, and it generally postures the professional and the organization for success. Those organizations that do engage the culture, and those professionals that are sensitive to culture and take the time to learn cultures, I find are postured for much better success, and they tend to have much better careers, and their individual professional goals are met much better. Here's one testimonial that I did receive from a client that I do a lot of work for. It is a U.S. Fortune 100 corporation, very, very big company. And they also recognize that culture is very, very important. And they commented me and put it in writing that my cultural skills did help in actually bringing in one project that they thought was almost impossible. Here is a quote that I came up with, and I'll give you the story of it. One time sometime during the 1990s, I came back from a trip, and I did immediately, very soon after that, I was in Asia. I went to visit my mother, and my mother, again, is a first-generation Sicilian American from New York City. So when you put those two together, you don't get too much more of an opinionated person, where everything that was on her mind basically came out of her mouth. And I mentioned some experience that I had, and she said, "Boy, oh boy, that's terrible. That's wrong." Something negative. She made a remark, and I thought for a minute, and I says, "No, it's not right or wrong. It's not good and bad. It's just different. What they do is different there, and they could think a lot of things we do is wrong." So in dealing with cultures, if you take nothing else away from this session rather than to this, when you engage other cultures, realize that things are just different. There's no such thing as right or wrong. It's just different, and some of the things we do are considered right or wrong, and it's better to go in with an open mind and a non-judgmental framework. Okay, now I'd like to speak a little bit about some of these cultures here: North America, China, India, the Philippines, Latin America, and Europe. These are the areas that I have experience in, and I wanted to just give you a touch of some of the things that are somewhat different than the way that we approach things, the way we think, the way we process information, and the way we act. And again, all of these areas, if one were to get an adequate understanding of it, it would require a minimum of a one-day cross-cultural training session. Okay, North America. That's probably all of us here. First of all, we're very, very legalistic. In the United States, we have more lawyers per capita than any other country in the world. I don't think there are too many other countries that even come close to us, maybe Canada, maybe Northern Europe. So therefore, we are governed by lawyers. Most of our politicians are lawyers. So we have in our culture that the contract governs, not what is said or promised. That people will, in a business setting, say things, commit to things, promise things, but really what you hold people to is the contract. Now we have a legal system to enforce contracts. In general, we're not as good at negotiation as our foreign counterparts. Again, our system here, we do very little bartering. Everything we do is, the price is listed, and we pay the price. In other cultures, people constantly barter every day on just about everything they buy. So in general, they're by nature better negotiators. It was interesting. I did see some people from somewhere in Asia when I was in Spain back in October, and they were at a souvenir store in Salamanca, and they were talking to this person, and they kept offering the proprietor of the shop a lower price, and he kept saying, "No, the price is what it is." And these people really had trouble understanding that they couldn't barter. That's what it is. That's what the price is, because in their culture, prices aren't usually posted, and everything's everything's subject to negotiation. We tend to be direct, very direct in the way we ask questions, the way we expect answers. If we want something, it's very direct. If you ask a question, we will give you a direct answer. but some of our counterparts in other parts of the world are not like that. In general, we're not warm and friendly at the beginning. Most of us North Americans will not joke at the beginning. Other cultures, they will get very loose and joking. We tend to hold off on that. And the questions we ask are very, very direct, and we expect a direct answer. North Americans are generally assertive and forceful. Not all other cultures are like that, and we'll be talking about those other ones. We tend to be prompt and responsive. And here's another one. Time is money. And it's interesting, when I train people, next month I'm going to be training a group of Mexican business people in New York City. They're being brought up there. And when I train them, I put up a slide, time is money, with a clock. And I says, we really believe that. And they all laugh. Okay? Different cultures don't consider time as money. We do. Okay? Another thing with most North Americans, we speak only one language. Very few people, Americans, speak multiple languages. And just about everybody that I deal with all over the world, except maybe for British people, do speak more than one language. Most of my associates in the world can speak 3 or 4 languages. And it's very, very common. My wife speaks 5 languages. Again, she was not educated here, lived in various countries, and can speak 5 languages. And she doesn't understand why Americans only speak one language, but we do. We tend to be straightforward. And another thing we have in our culture, especially now as our culture is evolving, is we challenge authority. And in a lot of other cultures, especially third world countries, they do not do that. And that sometimes causes issues. Okay, let's move over to Asia. We'll talk about China. A lot of the Confucian precepts that the Chinese culture is based on something called face and mansi, saving face, and that's very, very important. So, in dealing with your Chinese counterparts, never publicly humiliate them, never challenge them, never make them look bad, because saving face is very, very important to them, and it's not as important. It's not as important with us as it is with them. They have a system of mutual respect and respect for authority and obedience, and a lot of times blind obedience. So what a lot of times will happen in China is that they will agree to do something and not challenge us, because they won't challenge authority, and go about and try to do something that they don't understand or that they can't do, but their culture will not let them say, I don't understand how to do it, or I don't think we can do this, we need help. They won't do that. In general, their culture teaches them to be humble, so they won't brag, and I tell Westerners that we like to boast and brag. Do not do that in front of them. And their culture also causes them to be much more courteous than we are, and considerate and polite. They tend to be well-mannered. It's very, very interesting to see children in China and in other countries in the world that are very well-mannered, not running around, not uncontrollable, sitting at restaurants, a 4-year-old sitting at a table and just being quiet and eating and not jumping up and down. When my children were young, I almost would have to, a couple times I thought if I had to take them to a restaurant, I had to strap them in the chair to keep them seated. You don't see that there. They tend to be modest, and they will not show emotion. In fact, it's interesting with the Chinese, they very rarely will show emotion, but when something does happen, when they do show emotion, it's never mild emotion. It's usually very, very severe. It's interesting, one extreme to the other. Here's something that we all need to understand relative to the Chinese. They usually will not use the word no. It's considered hostile or disrespectful. And saying yes can mean just about anything. It could mean that, yes, they know your lips are moving and sound is coming out of your mouth, and that's it. And so many Westerners think that they have agreement when their Chinese counterparts say yes, they mean yes, I understand, yes, I can do it, and yes, I will do it. But that's not the case. It takes a little more digging to make sure that they understand it, that they're willing to do it, that they can do it, they understand it, and they actually will do it, that it will happen. Some of the recommendations for Chinese is develop a relationship first. There's a Chinese word called guanxi, which means relationships. It's very, very important to their culture. They want to get to know you, expect a lot of personal questions from Chinese. I've been asked how much money I make, how big is my house, very, very personal questions, and even other questions that were even more personal that in other cultures you would not get. And it's always important to inquire about their family. I am helping out running a small operation in China for another client that I have, and every time I call the person that's running it, she just last year had a baby, I ask, the first thing is, how is her baby doing? Because that's more important than getting down to business. And us Westerners tend to want to get down to business quicker. So the point here is invest in relationships. It'll pay dividends. Now here's this one case study where I was working with a client back at during the last quarter of 1988, and it was an Asian vehicle manufacturer. The actual manufacturer was not in China, but they were in Asia. But they were buying these kits. They were buying a complete kit to assemble a vehicle, and in their country they were doing final assembly. And they were doing it that way because they got the best tax treatment that way. They couldn't bring in a finished vehicle and enjoy the same tax benefits as if they did some added value within the country. So they were buying completed kits from a Chinese supplier and doing final assembly, test, and then distribution and sales in their particular country. And these individuals in this unnamed Asian country, they made no attempt to learn or apply the Chinese culture. And when I first got involved with them, I was in the middle of so many miscommunications, issues, and conflicts. And I was there for some other reasons to help the situation, to enhance the operation and improve quality and reduce costs. And I was so much involved getting in the middle of all of these issues that were happening, and it was requiring me to go back and forth. I was spending so much time going back and forth from Shanghai to this other country that I had trouble devoting time to what I really was brought there for. And it was so interesting that I would see emails and get voice messages with phone calls to say, I told you very clearly, or I told them very clearly. And it's interesting because, I kept hearing that word, and it was irritating me. Finally, I got a hold of the boss. I says, please don't use that word again. And I'm saying it in a polite way. I really was a little more forceful there. I didn't want to hear that again. And I says, just because it's clear to you and you have a better command of English than your Chinese business partners, okay, just because you think it's clear doesn't mean it's clear to the other person. And you should write and communicate so it's clear to the other person, not to you. And just because it's clear to you don't mean it's clear to them. And besides, making a statement like that in an email, it causes them to lose face in front of other people. Finally, I got them to stop doing it. Some of the other things they were doing, they were using emails constantly as the primary communication method, and that was causing problems because sometimes there wasn't a good understanding. And what I recommend to individuals that are dealing with countries that really don't have a good command of English, if you're communicating in English, is to send an email and always have a follow-up phone call to make sure that the person understands it, that they have the information that they need, they're able to do it, they're willing to do it, and indeed they will do it, okay? Because sometimes emails are not even answered. That was another thing. If the Chinese thought that they couldn't do it, they didn't want to say no, so they just wouldn't answer the emails. And their customers in this other country were getting very, very irritated, thinking they were being ignored. And I had to tell them, no, that is a message. You're not being ignored. When they don't respond to you, that usually spells there's a problem. Pick up the phone, call them, and find out what the situation is. And in general, there was very, very poor relationships there with Guangxi. And what happened is, a few months later, towards the end of 2008, the economy changed, and all of a sudden we headed into this current recession that we're in, and material prices dropped. And the vehicle manufacturer was demanding that the Chinese supplier reduce their prices, because they knew that the material prices dropped, and that had to affect the price. And the Chinese company that was supplying the kits, that was making some items and buying others, and putting the kits together and sending them off, they refused to pass on the cost savings. They just would not budge. And I was in the middle of this particular situation. And finally, the owner of the company, who I had good guanxi with, I believe, admitted to me, that says that these people are so difficult to deal with that it's not worth it for me to lower my price. I will deal with them, but at the existing price, they're not worth it because of all the problems that they're causing, all the trouble, all the misuse of a lot of my resources, that I'm just not going to reduce the price. And if I lose the business, it doesn't really matter to me. I'm willing to take that risk. And this is interesting. This is a culture that doesn't challenge authority, and but they were still willing to do it. Plus, they were heading on a recession and a slower period in their business. And some of the added costs that my client did have to deal with was a higher kit price. First of all, they didn't have to pay that price. They probably should have gotten it for about 10 or 12% less, but they were unable to negotiate it down. A lot of my time and travel back and forth, I was going back and forth to India, spending a lot of time sitting on an airplane rather than working, and spending money on air tickets, also getting diverted from what I was really sent there for. It resulted in a lot of schedule delays because of the way they're communicating, a lot of quality problems, and getting these problems resolved became a difficulty because of the communication. There were some incomplete shipments, that a few of them that I could, shipment issues with overages and other quantity issues that I can attribute to these cultural issues. A lot of erosion of the guanxi, or the relationships, and the supplier became very, very unmotivated. They felt that they couldn't please their customer, so I noticed that they began to even stop trying it. Okay, let's move away from China and speak somewhat about India. India has a caste system. There's various castes, and according to who you speak with, it can be anywhere from 4 to 7. I've not seen a consistent number of them, but it's there, and that puts people in different social classes. Therefore, there's a lot of hierarchy and a lot of respect for authority. Some of the other things with India, it's interesting because they expect you to be on time with phone calls, with meetings, with anything that you owe them as far as reports or information. But there's somewhat of a double standard. They tend to not reciprocate. It's interesting that in most other cultures, if they have a more or less laid back or late or it's okay to be late standard, or late is normal, then they act that way, but they don't expect you to be any different. Here it's a little different. Decisions tend to be made slow in India. There's a big family orientation. Again, it's always important to talk and ask about people's families, find out about their families. Do that at the beginning of your relationship with them. Also, the workers always feel that the boss is always right, so authority isn't challenged, and we're used to it challenging authority. And they hold a high value for relationships. Another thing one needs to be careful is, in a lot of situations, extending your hand and shaking hands with a woman is somewhat taboo. So be careful about that. What I recommend that people do is wait. If you have to meet a woman business counterpart, wait for her to initiate shaking hands. Otherwise, don't do it. If you know you're going to meet with a woman, and you know ahead of time, it's good to ask whoever, if you have a male counterpart, should I shake hands or should I not do it? What should I do? What is the expected situation? And it's changing, but still, in some situations, it can be uncomfortable for the woman if you if you initiate shaking hands. Also, you need to be careful about Indians. They have a way when they agree with you or they're going to do something, they'll shake their head, and it's almost like a no, shaking their head no. So they will say yes and also shake their head, and that confuses a lot of Westerners, and you have to try to get around that and realize that shaking their head, moving their head side to side actually is a positive gesture, not a negative one. Like a lot of other cultures, they like to do business with people that they trust. So work on developing a trust in your relationship. And if they offer you refreshments, accept the refreshments. It's also can be considered an insult if there are refreshments and they say have a cookie, have some tea. They're big drinkers of black tea. They call it black tea, but it's English style tea. And always accept it and take a little bit of it. Okay, the Philippines, different type of a culture. They are probably one of the warmest and friendliest people out there. They desire friendship. They want to be friends with you. So work on that, work on relationship, and become friends. It's so important to them. As far as the difference with them and other Asian cultures, they have this laid-back attitude, a lot like Southern Europeans and a lot like Latin Americans. They're not your typical Asians. I call them Latin Asians, and again, because they were a colony of Spain for 400 years, that has affected their culture. They have a very positive outlook. Of all the cultures I've worked with, no matter what happens, no matter what kind of a crisis, they don't lose it. They have a positive outlook. They're strong religious beliefs. They're like 90-something% of the people are Catholics. They are very devout Catholics, and they think God will take care of them in any crisis. And they could be into all kind of situations, and they're smiling, and they have this positive outlook. So they're good in a crisis situation. They're very eager to please foreigners. It's interesting when I go there, if I go to a store and I ask for something and they don't have it, they won't say, I'm sorry, we don't have it. Can I offer you something else? The clerk will give you something close to it or different and say, here, we have this. Okay, and I says, no, that's not what I want. And then it takes time for them to finally admit, no, they don't have it. Or if they don't have it, they will say, I'm sorry, we're out of this, and is that okay? And it's interesting because asking someone if it's okay, it doesn't matter. If they don't have something and they can't give it to you, it really doesn't matter. But it's important that to them that they please you. They're non-aggressive. They're not a very assertive or aggressive type culture. And they don't respond well to that. So being real pushy is not a good strategy with them. They're eager to learn. They're always asking to learn more things. They want to learn, and someone who likes to develop and teach, which when I was involved in the Philippines a lot, while I was at Timex, it was very rewarding to me because they wanted to learn, and I was I got a lot of self-satisfaction working with them. They're one of my favorite cultures. Okay, let's move across the Pacific to Latin America. The first thing with Latin America is they are regionally diverse. They're not all the same. And so many of us gringos think that Mexicans are the same as Argentinians. Even some of us, it'd be surprised how so many North Americans also think that the language of Brazil is Spanish. It's Portuguese. And so many people don't even realize that. But they're not all the same. They're all different. My wife didn't see a taco until she was an adult. Okay? So there's only 1 or 2 or 3 countries that that eats tacos. It's not the whole of Latin America. In fact, with my cross-cultural training, when I do it, depending upon the area, I have 3 different versions of Latin American culture, because Mexico is different than the Caribbean countries, which are Puerto Rico, Dominican Republic, and Cuba. They're different than Mexico, and then again, there's a difference in the culture of Ecuador and Peru and Bolivia. They're another separate culture. Argentina and Colombia and Panama are another separate culture, and then your very southern countries like Uruguay, Chile, and Argentina is another different culture. And again, Brazil is a separate one. So they're not all the same. Don't put them into the same bucket. Actually, it'll and a lot of times you will insult them if you assume that somebody from the Dominican Republic, they eat burritos and tacos and tortillas all the time. Okay, they tend to be warm and friendly. They're a very warm and friendly culture, so they warm up to you quickly. They're very tactile, too. It's interesting. I was doing work a few years ago in Mexico, and the second day that I went into the facility, I just met the people the first day, the receptionist and another secretary, as soon as I came in the morning, it was buenos dias, ¿cómo está? And I got a hug and a kiss from them. These are women I only met the day before. There are women that I know that I'm friendly with in China that I know for years, for 10 years. And if I were to embrace them, they would almost die. Okay, so it's a different culture. So being tactile is very, very is acceptable there. Okay, their attitude of time, again, in most of the regions there are exceptions. They have a time, they're not on time, and a lot of places in some countries, people sometimes will book 2 meetings at the same time and meet with whoever shows up first, and normally it's people late. In fact, my wife growing up tells me that wedding invitations, you would always put that it started an hour before the real time to get people there on time, because people just don't show up on time. And it's interesting when we have to go somewhere. When I'm always ready, I like to be on time, and my wife doesn't have the same for social situations. Do not have the same time value or attitude towards time. But there are exceptions. I was in Ecuador a few years ago, and I noticed there was a bit different. People were on time. It was amazing. I was hearing Spanish, and things happened on time, which was a surprise to me. So there are some exceptions, and I know for a fact that Ecuador is one of them, and probably Peruvian culture is very close to that, so it's probably also the same. Another thing with Latin Americans is be formal at the beginning. When I send emails to Latin American people and I don't have a relationship with them, or it's the first few emails, I address them and even write the email. I write it estimando señor, whatever, or señora. I write it out, and I talk to them that way first until I get more familiar with them. Then I will be get to a more familiar first name situation. So it's good to start that way. It's always good to meet with the decision maker. Again, in these countries, organizations are very autocratic. Most of the time, the workers or even professionals are not empowered to make decisions. Again, the relationship orientation is there. Work on relationships, and also it's always good to start conversations, and that's something I have to constantly remind myself to ask people about their family and about their personal situation first, and then get into business later, where we sometimes do the opposite. You know, we get right down to business first, but it's good to do the social conversation first. Okay, let's jump over another ocean and move over to Europe. Northern European culture is very similar to North American culture. When you think about how our culture started, the United States and Canada was first settled by three Northern European countries, the Netherlands, England, and France. So we have more, our culture is closer to Northern Europe, where the Latin American culture is more aligned to Portugal and Spain, because those are the countries that colonized the Latin American countries. But it's similar to North America. Again, be on time, especially in Germany. Germans, if they feel that if they feel that they don't get there early, they're not on time. Okay, it's very, very important. Conservative dress is important. They're sensitive in languages, even though most Europeans that are involved in any kind of international business do speak English, and they speak it well. Just about, I've never really encountered any Northern European that did not speak English almost perfect. Even sometimes parking lot attendants in Germany speaks perfect English. But they're sensitive to language, so it's good to try to speak a few words in their language. Try to learn things about their language. A lot of times I will not get a local language menu. I'll get one in their language, and I'll ask them to explain what things are. And they tend to move to business fast. You know, if you start with a social conversation with, say, a German, I've done it a few times, ask them about their family, they get annoyed and say, what do you need? What do you need? You know, that's really not important to them. So you can get down to business fast, and it's a little easier for us North Americans to deal with them. Southern Europe is a little bit different. They're more focused on relationships. They're somewhat laid back, not as much as other countries. More tactile in their business dealings. They move to business a little slower, and especially if you go to Italy, they're very, very big on dress. So you want to get your best suit, your best clothes out, shine your shoes, because dressing sharp is important. They value it. Even poor people dress well there. It's amazing when you go there. And also, be careful. It's starting to change now, but in a lot of areas in Italy, the shoe color is important. Brown shoes are considered informal shoes. So men, you know, make sure you bring a good pair of black shoes. Okay, applying the cultural savvy. You know, avoid stereotyping. Okay, try to go in with an open mind. You know, I tell people it's so fascinating to understand and engage in another culture. It enriches one's person. I feel very fortunate that I've had the opportunity to work in all of these different cultures. And you should really stop, look and listen, ask questions about items, and show an interest in a particular culture. Ask them why things are a certain way. Ask them about their history. It's also good to learn about the history. When I do cross-cultural training, I do spend some time going through a bit of the history, because that shapes the culture, and learn to enjoy the experience. It's really very mind-opening, and just to see that different people think, act, and actually feel things differently than we do And, you know, the North American way isn't the only way, and in a lot of cases, all my travels, I found out in a lot of ways, I find that some things in different countries actually, I think, are a little bit better than the way that we do them. Okay, applying cultural savvy, research and learn the culture. Learn the culture. I really recommend that. You know, if you don't have the opportunity to attend a cross-cultural training program, is to do your own research. It's not that hard to do. There's also some free cultural information available on the DESARA website. Learn about the history, and it's also important to learn a few words, learn some language basics. You don't have to learn a lot. You want to learn a few terms that are important to learn, like, you know, can you help me? Where is the toilet? Things like that, but also how to say good morning, how are you, how to greet people, because you will get a good reaction when you're able to do that. You know, I'll meet somebody that's Mandarin speaking in China, and I'll shake hands with them, and I'll say ni hao, and they get, you know, this is a culture that doesn't show emotion. Usually, you get people that will smile and be very impressed that that you make an effort, even if you don't pronounce it right and you ask questions about it. You'll impress them by trying to learn about languages, because Americans don't value learning languages as much as other languages as much as in other countries. So it's important to learn some of that. Ask questions about why things are done. Look to learn. Sometimes if there's a holiday or a festival, I'll ask, you know, what does it commemorate? What's the reason for it? Things like that. Communicate their way. Try to understand the way that they communicate, the way they write, so you can communicate their way, and always show respect for their customs and cultures. And the best investment that I can recommend anybody, and if I come across a prospective client and they have a limited budget and they can't afford too many things, you know, what I almost beg them to do is, if you can't afford anything else, invest in a one-day cross-cultural training program and get all your team members to do it. And also, if you have an operation in another country, or a joint venture, or a key supplier, a very major supplier, is to get training for that particular people, to give them Western training. It's very, very important that on the other side that you do it in both directions, and it's a real vital investment. And I've done training of Chinese people, and I've trained them on American cultures. Although, because we export our culture constantly through music and more than anything else through movies, you'll find that foreigners know much more about our culture than we know about theirs. But still, it helps to do it in both directions. If you're interested in any more information, if you go to this particular page on our website, you can download some articles. I have information there, cultural information about Asia, and I have some cultural information about Latin America that you're welcome to, and it's free. All you need to do is put your name in there and your email address, and then you can download it. Okay. Just to sum up, some of the things that we can offer at the DESARA Group, we've worked with the various governments in all 50 states, and also with the federal government and some municipalities. And in a lot of cases, we can help you qualify to get grant funding. And some of this tuition assistance for various training can be up to 100%. And it usually starts at about 50%. So if you're interested in it, on this page here has more of the details. Please give myself, or you can call the DESARA office and get more information and speak to somebody, and I will refer you to the right person to work with you to see if your organization does qualify for grant funding. And we can help you to identify the available funding, to understand the rules of the program, how to apply. We can also help you to administer the funds once you receive them. And here is the contact here. If you call this the office number, you can get more information, or if you wish, you can call me. Okay, I'd like to thank you for allowing us to be of service. I hope it was useful. I hope it helped. And I do believe we have some time here for some questions. Karen, if you can unmute the individuals, and I can take
everyone who's entered a code is unmuted. It looks just like only Dan and Robin are showing unmuted. If anyone else wants to be unmuted, and you could raise your hand using the little hand raise icon, I'll see what we can do for you. Okay, Dan, Robin, let's see. Now, John is raising his hand, and the issue here is, John, you need to enter your audio pin. You need to enter your audio pin so that we can unmute you. It's not showing up. John, you want to write a question, or I urge you to call Mark after the call. Mark, you want to give him your phone number audibly? So, I guess it's right there on the screen.
It's right here on the screen.
Yeah. Sorry, John.
Okay.
Now I can hear you.
Oh, okay. Well, I have a quick question.
Sure.
Mark, we've been in China about 4 years, and we followed almost to a T what you proposed last week, low-cost country outsourcing. But we're moving into India, and we've got about 5 manufacturers we're working with. And in China, we were able to make multiple trips and establish a relationship, spend a lot of time. And in India, due to the budget and economy slowdown, it's all been teleconferences, email, and voicemails. And the relationships aren't nearly as good. So any suggestions on how to improve those would be great.
Okay, let me just ask you a question now. This is suppliers, or is this a company facility?
No, these are multiple.
What's the business relationship?
They're suppliers to us.
They are suppliers.
Yes.
Okay. One thing is, if they are suppliers and they have multiple customers in North America, a lot of times they will make trips. So find out if they are coming, and one way is to have some kind of a meeting in the United States is one way.
Okay, good suggestion.
Okay. Yeah. Another thing would be, and I've done it with companies, is host a periodic, and I used to do it yearly, sometimes twice a year, a supplier conference. And you invite all the suppliers in for a 1 or 2 day conference where you talk about the agenda can be many things, and that's another way. And sometimes you can get them to come to you.
Okay, good, thanks.
And a lot of times these sometimes I know the Chinese, they will fly a coach, so the cost to travel is less. But some of the Indians, they do require, if they're high-level people, they do expect to fly business class. But that's one other